Imagine stepping into a grand ballroom of 18th century Europe. Crystal chandeliers shimmer overhead. Noblemen and ladies swirl in refined conversation. Politics and philosophy mingle with the notes of violins. And yet, amidst this dazzling spectacle, all eyes are drawn to a single figure. Not because he flaunts his wealth or shouts for attention, but because his very presence seems to bend time itself. He moves gracefully from one conversation to another, speaking flawless French, German, Italian, Spanish, even Portuguese, without the faintest trace of an accent. He tells stories of ancient courts as if he had walked their corridors only yesterday. And when asked the most human of questions, his age, he responds with nothing more than a knowing smile. This man whispered about in awe and suspicion was the Count of Saint Germain, a figure so steeped in mystery that kings, queens, philosophers, and occultists alike could not decide whether he was a brilliant charlatan or something far beyond human. He dazzled the world with priceless jewels of unclear origin, enchanted audiences with hauntingly beautiful music, and spoke of alchemy and immortality as if he possessed their secrets. Some swore he had discovered the elixir of eternal life. Others believed he was a cunning spy, a master manipulator hiding behind countless disguises. But who was he really? Was he simply a gifted illusionist who knew how to play the dangerous game of European courts? Or was he, as legend insists, a traveler between centuries, an immortal soul walking among mortals? To search for answers, we must step beyond the surface of history and enter the current of hidden traditions, where fact and myth intertwine, and where figures like Saint Germain refuse to remain confined to the dusty pages of biographies. His life is not just a story of one man, but a doorway into the underground rivers of esoteric wisdom that have shaped humanity in silence, flowing alongside official history. The Enlightenment was spreading across Europe when Saint Germain appeared like a phantom without a past. It was an age when reason began to eclipse superstition, when science slowly pried open nature's secrets. And yet, in the midst of this dawning rationality, a man emerged who seemed to belong to another dimension entirely. His first known appearance took place in London in 1743. There, polite society gossiped about his extraordinary skill at the violin, his ability to compose music of startling complexity, and his uncanny gift for languages. Within 2 years, he would be briefly imprisoned under suspicion of espionage, though no evidence against him was ever found, and he was released just as mysteriously as he had arrived. When pressed about his origins, Saint Germain gave nothing but contradictions. At times, he implied royal blood, claiming descent from the Prince of Transylvania. At others, he hinted at ties to Arabia, to distant lands in the Orient, or even to Venice in a century-long past. One countess who swore she had met him decades earlier confronted him at the French court. Astonished at his unchanged appearance, his response was chilling in its calmness. "It is true, madam, I knew Venice well in the last century." She calculated his age and gasped. He must be 100 years old. Saint Germain simply replied, "That is not impossible." Again and again, witnesses wrote of his strange agelessness. A Danish diplomat noted that Saint Germain looked no older after 20 years of acquaintance. Madame d'Adhémar, lady-in-waiting to Queen Marie Antoinette, claimed to have seen him not only in 1789 but again in 1821 and even 1833, long after official records declared him dead. How could one man persist unchanged across generations? Was it trickery, a succession of impostors, or something else, something that cannot be explained by reason alone? If Saint Germain had only been a charming conversationalist and polyglot, his legend might have faded. But his talents extended into realms that bordered on the miraculous. In Paris, he maintained a laboratory where he engaged in strange alchemical experiments. He demonstrated methods of purifying gems, allegedly removing flaws from diamonds so perfectly that their value multiplied instantly. He spoke of transmutation, the transformation of base metals into noble ones, not as an abstract theory, but with the confidence of one who had accomplished it. And always he cloaked his knowledge in riddles, dropping hints of a science that lay beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. He was equally at home in the salons of the aristocracy. He played piano and violin with the skill of a virtuoso. His compositions, some of which survive today, are complex, stirring, and strangely otherworldly. And wherever he traveled, London, Paris, Vienna, he spoke of historical events centuries past as if recalling them from memory rather than from books. He described the court of Francis I of France, the intrigues of the Italian Renaissance, even the childhood of monarchs long gone, with such detail that listeners were left unsettled. Again and again, Saint Germain shifted his identity. In different courts, he was known by different names: Marquis de Montferrat, Count Bellemare, Chevalier Schuning, Prince Rákóczi, and more. Always appearing wealthy, always adorned with jewels, yet no one could trace the source of his fortune. He never seemed to draw money from banks, never carried accounts, yet he lived in lavish comfort. To a banker who once asked about his wealth, he replied enigmatically, "True wealth is not that which men count in coins, but that which transcends time." Even in the dangerous world of diplomacy, Saint Germain moved like a shadow. In 1760, during the 7 Years' War, he appeared in The Hague, attempting to broker peace between England and France. Strangely, he carried no official authority from any government, yet ambassadors welcomed him as though he held power. British statesman Lord Halifax admitted in private letters, "This man knows more about the internal affairs of our courts than our own ambassadors." How could a man with no position, no title, and no nation of allegiance wield such influence? Perhaps most baffling of all was the sense that Saint Germain was not merely a courtier or alchemist, but a messenger of some higher order. Manuscripts attributed to him contain passages about a wisdom that transcends ordinary mortality. He spoke of knowledge passed only to those who sought the light sincerely, knowledge that bridged the physical and the spiritual. Witnesses described him as a man who could read the hearts of others, who used his influence not for self-interest, but to steer leaders toward peace and higher purpose. It is here that Saint Germain begins to slip from the pages of history into the realm of myth. Was he an immortal? A secret agent of some hidden brotherhood? A master alchemist who had unlocked the quintessence of life itself? Or was he, as some daringly suggested, a living archetype, an embodiment of humanity's yearning for transcendence, passing through the ages disguised as one man? In the glittering courts of Europe, where intrigue could decide the fate of nations, Saint Germain revealed yet another side of his mysterious nature, that of an unofficial diplomat. He slipped between kingdoms with the ease of a man carrying invisible credentials, speaking privately with kings and ministers as if entrusted with a mission no one else could comprehend. His presence was unsettling because he seemed untethered to any government, any single allegiance, and yet he was welcomed by dignitaries who listened to him with the gravity reserved for ambassadors. Was he an agent of peace? A manipulator serving his own hidden agenda? Or a channel through which higher powers sought to influence the direction of history? Even more confounding was his inexhaustible wealth. He lived in silks, wore jewels of staggering brilliance, and resided in comfort wherever he went. But unlike nobles whose fortunes could be traced to land, trade, or inheritance, Saint Germain's resources appeared out of thin air. He never withdrew money from banks, was never seen conducting business transactions, and seemed immune to financial concern. Some whispered of hidden treasures, others of alchemical mastery. the ability to summon wealth through the transformation of matter itself. When pressed, he would smile and say, "Wealth is not measured by coins, but by what endures beyond the grasp of time." It was not an answer, but it was enough to deepen the mystery. Yet his true obsession was not with riches, but with transformation. In an age when alchemy was being replaced by the emerging science of chemistry, Saint Germain persisted in exploring realms that defied conventional understanding. Those who knew him spoke of extraordinary demonstrations, metals purified beyond known methods, diamonds cleared of their flaws as though by unseen hands, elixirs that healed the sick within hours. In St. Petersburg, he was said to have cured Count Alexei Orlov with a few drops of a transparent liquid. When asked what it was, he only replied with a cryptic phrase, "The concentrated dew of universal life." His chemical laboratories became legendary. In Thuringia, he collaborated with the alchemist Johann Gottlob Fichte to create fabrics dyed with colors so vivid and durable they seemed otherworldly. Later in Eckernförde, he established a dye factory whose results astonished the textile industry. Yet he refused to reveal his formulas. To his contemporaries, it appeared as if he held fragments of a knowledge far older than modern science, knowledge that blurred the boundary between matter and spirit. But for Saint Germain, alchemy was never merely about metals or gems. It was a metaphor for the soul. To those few granted his confidence, he spoke of a higher transmutation, the refining of human consciousness itself. Just as base metals could be elevated into gold, he suggested, so too could the human spirit be purified and lifted into its divine potential. This was the true, great work, not wealth, not power, but transformation of the self. Eyewitnesses recalled conversations in which he described the human soul as an alchemist might describe raw lead, dense, heavy, imperfect, but with within it the seed of gold, awaiting fire and precision to awaken its brilliance. To him, spiritual alchemy was no metaphor, it was a living science. He insisted that the highest form of knowledge lay not in books or logic, but in direct experience. What mystics called gnosis, an intimate knowing of truth that surpasses both sense and reason. The notion that Saint Germain was working on multiple levels at once, political, cultural, spiritual, has fascinated researchers for centuries. Was he orchestrating peace between nations while simultaneously planting seeds of esoteric wisdom for future generations? His contemporaries were baffled by how effortlessly he navigated every sphere of life. To King Louis XV of France, he once remarked, "True politics is not the conquest of territory, but the elevation of consciousness." It was a statement that revealed the mind of a visionary, someone whose concerns reached far beyond the rivalries of kings. He was not merely a figure of spectacle, he was also a teacher, albeit a very selective one. In Paris, between 1758 and 1762, Saint Germain gathered a discreet circle of students drawn from the aristocracy and intellectual elite. Their meetings, often held at midnight, were dedicated to Hermetic principles, astrology, and techniques for expanding human perception. An anonymous manuscript from that era records a lesson attributed to him. The visible universe is but the shadow of subtler realities. Within every human being lie dormant faculties that, when awakened, perceive those higher worlds. Prince Charles of Hesse, one of his closest companions, later wrote in his diary that Saint Germain instructed him in cosmic cycles, the rise and fall of civilizations, the hidden laws guiding history, and the secret potential of the human mind. These were not teachings one could simply read in a book. They felt as if they came from a source deeper and older than anything within Europe's traditions. Again and again, his lessons circled around three central themes: the practice of inner alchemy, the awakening of extraordinary faculties of consciousness, and the recognition of vast historical cycles. He warned against chasing powers for their own sake, insisting that psychic abilities were only natural byproducts of inner purification. "Do not seek powers," he cautioned, "for in doing so you only strengthen the ego. Seek purity, and powers will follow as fruit follows a healthy tree." One of his most haunting teachings concerned the cycles of time. He described history not as a linear progression but as vast arcs, thousands of years long, in which civilizations rise, flourish, fall, and are reborn. He spoke of lost cultures, forgotten ages, sciences that once surpassed our own, and the inevitability of renewal after collapse. To some, it was terrifying. To others, it was liberating. The reassurance that nothing truly ends, only transforms. In Vienna, he encountered members of the Rosicrucian order, where he spoke with authority about their deepest mysteries. To Freemasons, he hinted at being a living link to ancient wisdom believed lost. Again and again, he suggested that his mission was not to dazzle the world with tricks, but to prepare Europe for a coming transformation, a purification after which a new kind of society would emerge. Some even whispered that he was no ordinary man at all, but an emissary from a hidden brotherhood, sent to guide humanity through a turning point in its destiny. And so the enigma deepened. Was Saint Germain a man, a myth, or something in between? His teachings resonated like prophecy. He spoke of knowledge that would return after centuries of obscurity, of energies that could transform not just individuals but entire civilizations. He alluded to forces invisible yet powerful, energies of color, sound, and vibration that could alter states of consciousness. Those who heard him never forgot. Some were unsettled, others inspired, but all agreed he was unlike anyone they had ever met. By now, Saint Germain had become more than a wandering noble. To those who followed him closely, he seemed like a bridge between worlds, a man who walked among the powerful yet spoke the language of mystics. His presence in secret societies only deepened this perception. Within Masonic and Rosicrucian circles, rumors spread that he was an emissary of a hidden Eastern brotherhood, a messenger carrying fragments of wisdom preserved across millennia. Some of his disciples recorded astonishing conversations. He spoke of 3 levels of knowledge: the knowledge of the senses, which he called limited and deceptive; the knowledge of reason, which he valued but found incomplete; and finally a higher knowing, direct gnosis, which revealed the essence of reality itself. This third kind of knowledge, he insisted, was the path of liberation, the awakening of the divine spark within. His methods of teaching were unorthodox. He didn't merely lecture, he demonstrated. Music for him was not entertainment but initiation. Witnesses recalled him playing haunting melodies on the violin, compositions that seemed to alter the very consciousness of listeners. Some described sensations of expanded awareness, as if invisible doors had opened in their minds. Saint Germain explained that these harmonies echoed cosmic patterns, resonating with hidden centers in the human being. For him, sound was alchemy, vibration a key to transformation. Colors, scents, and symbols also appeared in his gatherings. He treated them as tools for awakening dormant faculties of perception, methods for tuning the human being into subtler realities. Everything he did hinted at a science far deeper than ordinary knowledge, a science that embraced both the material and the spiritual. One of the most remarkable aspects of his teachings was his vision of historical cycles. He told his students that civilizations rise and fall in great waves, separated by epochs of transformation. Knowledge, he said, is never entirely lost. It vanishes for a time, hidden in silence, only to re-emerge when the world is ready. He spoke of vanished societies that once possessed sciences superior to those of his own century, and he warned of coming upheavals in Europe that would clear the way for a new order. To those listening, his words carried the weight of prophecy. In fact, some contemporaries later claimed that he foresaw the French Revolution, describing it as a purification, painful but necessary, for Europe. He told one Freemason in Lyon that a new form of society would rise from the ashes, guided by higher principles. His ability to describe these future events with such clarity left many convinced that he was not bound by time as ordinary men are. The texts attributed to him reflect this same depth. Among the most famous is La Très Sainte Trinosophie, or the Most Holy Trinosophia, an esoteric manuscript of extraordinary complexity. Rich in symbols, allegories, and alchemical imagery, it combines Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Eastern traditions into a tapestry of hidden meaning. Scholars who studied it remarked that it was not the work of a mere dabbler, but of someone with profound mastery of multiple initiatic currents. Whether or not Saint Germain himself wrote it, the text bears the mark of a mind fluent in the languages of mystery. Esoteric historian Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, would later call him the most enigmatic man of modern times. She claimed that he not only possessed but transmitted knowledge of subtle forces in nature, forces barely recognized even by advanced occultists. And she was not alone. The Rosicrucian Sigismund Backstrom reported that Saint Germain spoke of operations of the great work as if he had performed them personally. Others whispered that he knew secrets not written in books, transmitted only through oral tradition. A central element of his doctrine was the concept of the violet flame, an energy of purification and transformation that could be invoked through conscious intention. This force, he explained, had the power to transmute negative states into positive, both within individuals and across collective fields of humanity. The violet flame was not metaphorical. It was described as a living energy, a spiritual fire accessible to those who knew how to call upon it. Closely related was his teaching of the I Am Presence, the eternal divine core within every human being. He urged his students to look beyond the masks of personality, beyond the fleeting roles and identities they wore, and recognize the unchanging essence of divinity within. This recognition, he said, was the true goal of human evolution. To live from the I Am was to live as a conscious co-creator with the universe. Those privileged enough to receive his teachings noted how he used simple yet profound language. He often cautioned that supernatural powers and occult knowledge were meaningless if not anchored in purity of heart. His focus was always transformation of the self, of society, of consciousness itself. The Count of Hesse, in his diary, wrote that Saint Germain instructed him not only in alchemical processes, but also in the mysteries of the inner nature of man and the cosmic cycles guiding the rise and fall of civilizations. Saint Germain's vision of the future was not simply one of disaster, but of renewal. He described history as a vast alchemical furnace in which humanity itself was being refined. Every war, every collapse, every apparent ending was part of a greater process of purification. He told his students that what appears to be destruction is often preparation, that new societies guided by wisdom would eventually emerge from the ashes of the old. For many who encountered him, the impression was inescapable. Saint Germain was not just a man of his century. He seemed to belong to every century. He spoke of ancient Egypt, India, Tibet, with an intimacy that suggested personal experience. He hinted at lost civilizations that had mastered sciences modern men could scarcely imagine. And he taught as though he carried fragments of this primordial wisdom into the present, planting seeds for future generations to discover. No matter where he appeared, whether in courts of kings, laboratories of alchemists or secret gatherings of mystics. He left behind an air of wonder, of unfinished story. Those who met him walked away changed, unsure whether they had encountered a genius, a prophet, or an immortal. And perhaps that was precisely the point. The question of Saint Germain's death only thickens the veil around him. According to official records, he supposedly died on February 27, 1784, at the residence of Prince Charles of Hesse in Germany. Yet even this event is wrapped in ambiguity. The prince himself, who claimed to have been present, later admitted in his memoirs, "If he truly died, I cannot say for certain." That hesitation has fueled centuries of speculation. For the years that followed, reports of his reappearances spread across Europe. Countess d'Adhémar insisted she saw him not once but multiple times after his supposed death, always looking the same as he had decades earlier. During the French Revolution, it was whispered that he appeared to warn certain nobles of danger. In 1815, the occultist Eliphas Lévy wrote that Saint Germain had been seen in Vienna during the Congress, moving among diplomats as though no time had passed. Even as late as 1867, Helena Blavatsky claimed to have met him in Italy. If these accounts are true, then his story did not end in 1784. It merely changed form. This transformation of his legend led to a new understanding, that Saint Germain was no longer seen simply as a man, but as an ascended master. In esoteric thought, such beings are those who have transcended the ordinary cycle of birth and death, continuing to guide humanity from behind the scenes. For the Theosophical Society, founded by Blavatsky in 1875, Saint Germain became part of a spiritual hierarchy known as the Great White Brotherhood, a collective of enlightened beings who quietly influence the evolution of human consciousness. Later, theosophists like Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater described him as Master Rakoczy, or Master R, a guide working tirelessly to elevate humanity. In their vision, he was no longer confined to the courts of Europe but had assumed a timeless role, shaping thought and inspiration across generations. To his followers, his life had moved beyond biography into archetype. He had become the eternal alchemist, transforming not metals, but souls. In the 20th century, his influence only expanded. The I Am movement, founded in the 1930s by Guy Ballard, claimed direct encounters with Saint Germain on Mount Shasta in California. Ballard's books, published under the name Godfrey Ray King, described long conversations with the Count, in which he revealed teachings for a new age of humanity. These writings declared that Saint Germain had ascended fully, free from all physical limitations, after lifetimes spent as figures such as the prophet Samuel Joseph, the father of Jesus, Merlin the magician, Roger Bacon, Francis Bacon, and finally as the Count of Saint Germain. To some, this sounded like fantasy, but to others it explained the impossible, how one man could move through centuries unchanged, leaving behind traces of wisdom in so many eras. If true, Saint Germain was not a historical oddity but a living archetype, reappearing across time to deliver teachings suited to each age. His legacy also manifested in practices that continue to this day. The violet flame, once described in private gatherings, became a central tool of modern spiritual movements. Practitioners around the world use it in meditation and prayer, visualizing it as a purifying fire that dissolves negativity and restores harmony. Likewise, the affirmations known as decrees, spoken words of intention and authority, echo Saint Germain's emphasis on the creative power of language. Long before modern self-help emphasized positive affirmations, he was teaching that words charged with conviction could shape reality. Esoteric thinkers associated him with the dawning of the Age of Aquarius, the time of planetary transition when human consciousness would rise into a new vibration. To many groups, he became the guiding figure of this new era, a hierarch overseeing humanity's passage into a higher octave of being. His teachings about self-mastery, conscious transformation, and the integration of spirituality into everyday life anticipated much of what would later define modern metaphysics and New Age thought. But perhaps the most intriguing element of his legacy lies in the prophecies attributed to him. A manuscript preserved in the Vatican Library, supposedly dictated to Prince Hesse, speaks of a coming time when humanity would harness forces capable of either elevating or destroying itself. In that age, he said, the veil between worlds would grow thin, and those who cultivated inner vision would recognize guides who had always been present but unseen. Many readers today interpret these words as describing our modern age, an era of technology so powerful it can either save or doom civilization, and a time when spiritual guidance is sought more than ever. In Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophy, Saint Germain is linked to the Rosicrucian current, seen as a figure carrying the impulse to unite science and spirituality. In the New Age movement, he is invoked as a personal guide for transformation, a master who can be called upon in meditation or ritual. From novels and operas to films and music, his enigmatic figure continues to inspire artists who explore immortality, hidden wisdom, and the mysteries of human potential. And scholars, too, have turned their gaze toward him, not to dismiss, but to reconsider. Historians like Thomas Munch and Marie-Raymond de Lalande argue that even without the supernatural claims, Saint Germain was a key figure in the alternative intellectual networks of the Enlightenment. He represented a unique synthesis of esoteric tradition and progressive thought at a time when Europe was shifting dramatically. He was both ahead of his age and timeless in his concerns. Again and again, those who study him return to one theme: continuity. To Saint Germain, nothing ever truly ends, as he was once recorded telling Prince Hesse in their last conversation. What appears to be the end is always the beginning of something greater. Death is not extinction, but transformation. True knowledge is never lost. It changes form and returns when the world is ready. Perhaps this is the secret of his enduring presence. He is not remembered simply as a courtier or an alchemist or even as a prophet. He endures as a living presence, an invitation to imagine what humanity might become if it embraces transformation, wisdom, and the eternal spark of the divine within. The enigma of Saint Germain is not one that can be solved by dates, documents, or dusty archives. His story refuses to stay locked in the past. Like a melody that lingers in the air long after the violin has gone silent, his presence continues to echo across centuries. He is remembered not merely as a figure of history, but as a symbol of what lies just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Consider the paradox. Here was a man who dazzled kings and queens, yet spoke of truths that transcended power and wealth. A man who appeared at the very center of European politics, yet moved like an outsider belonging to no nation, no lineage, no allegiance. A man who left behind jewels, compositions, and manuscripts, yet whose greatest legacy cannot be weighed or measured. Instead, it lives in whispers of immortality and practices that seek transformation of the soul, and in the sense that humanity is always guided by forces just out of sight. Even in our modern age, Saint Germain continues to appear, sometimes in the rituals of esoteric orders, sometimes in the meditations of New Age practitioners, sometimes in the pages of novels and films that borrow his mystery. To some, he is an archetype, the eternal wanderer, the alchemist, the wise guide who appears when humanity stands at the threshold of change. To others, he is still quite literally alive, working quietly behind the scenes to guide civilization through its darkest and brightest hours. Whether or not one accepts the more supernatural elements of his story, one truth is undeniable. He has profoundly shaped the way we think about hidden knowledge and the possibilities of human transformation. He represents the enduring dream that we are more than flesh and bone, more than our brief span of years, that within us lies a spark that can transcend time. This, perhaps, is why his legend persists. For in every era, humanity finds itself facing the same question. Are we bound by the limits of what we see, or are we capable of awakening to something greater? Saint Germain, in his elusive way, seems to embody the second answer. His teachings about the I Am Presence, about the violet flame, about cycles of renewal and the alchemy of consciousness are not relics of the 18th century, but living invitations. They remind us that transformation is possible, not only for metals in a crucible, but for souls in the fire of experience. There is also something deeply personal in his message. Behind the grandeur of courts and the intrigue of politics, his words return again and again to the individual, to the quiet work of inner refinement. He insisted that true mastery was not about commanding armies or amassing treasures, but about purifying the heart, awakening awareness, and aligning oneself with the eternal. To recognize the I Am within is to discover that you too are part of that timeless current. And perhaps that is his greatest secret, that the mystery of Saint Germain is not confined to one enigmatic man, but is reflected in each of us waiting to be realized. It is no accident that seekers still call upon his name. In meditation halls, in whispered prayers, in invocations of the violet flame, people reach toward the energy he represents. Some feel his presence as a subtle guidance, a voice in dreams, or a sudden inspiration in times of crisis. Others simply carry his story as a symbol of what is possible when human life is aligned with something greater than itself. In either case, the legend has not dimmed. It has evolved, becoming part of the living fabric of spiritual exploration. And so we are left not with answers, but with a deeper question. Who was the Count of Saint Germain? Was he an immortal, a prophet, an alchemist, a master from beyond time? Or was he, in the end, a mirror, reflecting back to humanity its own yearning for transformation, its own hidden potential? As with all true mysteries, the value lies not in the solution, but in the search. Saint Germain invites us to look beyond appearances, beyond the surface of history, and even beyond the limits we set for ourselves. He reminds us that knowledge is not static, that wisdom is never lost, and that every ending conceals a new beginning. Perhaps that is why, even now, when we speak his name, it feels less like recalling a ghost of the past and more like touching a presence that still walks beside us. He is not gone, because the mystery he represents cannot die. It lives wherever someone dares to ask. What more is possible for us as human beings? What doors might open if we too sought to awaken the alchemist within? And so, as the candles burn low and the echoes of history fade, we are left with a final image. A figure moving effortlessly through courts and centuries, smiling with quiet certainty, carrying secrets that no one could wrest from him, yet offering glimpses of a knowledge that changes everything. Whether man or myth, mortal or immortal, the Count of Saint Germain remains what he has always been: the eternal enigma, the guardian of hidden fire, and the reminder that within each of us lies a mystery waiting to awaken.